Okay, so I want to briefly discuss the Chinese Revolution and then also briefly discuss the Korean War. There are, although we're talking about the Cold War as a whole, it's called the Cold War because there is no outbreak of direct warfare between the United States and the Soviet Union. But there are lots of what we might call proxy wars or hotspots, flashpoints, if you will, during the Cold War, where actual physical conflict does erupt and there is violence. And so the Korean War is not separate from the Cold War. The Korean War is one of those hotspots or proxy wars that's very much part of the Cold War. Lily, can you go check on Oliver real quick? Go peek and then come back. Sorry. It's spring break. So who are well, in order to understand the Korean War, I want us to back up just quickly and make sure that we understand how or why communism came to be in China. So first of all, Lily, stop or you're going to have to leave. The communist leader in China is Mao Zedong, and he is the leader of the communists as they assume power in China, but also as they work to come to power in China. And I'm actually going to close this and adjust this map a little bit because the date is off the screen and I don't want it to be. Okay. And then the leader of the nationalists in China is a man named Chiang Kai-shek. They will actually be fighting against each other, nationalists versus communists, for control of the for control of China well before the end of World War II. The nationalists, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, had actually driven the communists back to some fairly remote parts of China prior to World War II breaking out. And then when the Japanese invade, the nationalists abandon their fight against the communists. They sort of don't finish them off and instead turn their attention and their focus toward fighting off the Japanese in World War II. When the war is over, the communists have spent that time rebuilding and also spent that time gathering allies and finding allies amongst the peasants of China who are much more willing to work with them than they are the nationalists. And so if we watch this progression of communism in China, you can see the communists are in red, the nationalists are there in white, and you can see what happens as the years go by. So we start 46, 48, 49, and then boom, 1950, China is communist. China becomes known as the People's Republic of China, and the nationalists flee to Taiwan. Let's see here. In 1950, the Soviet Union and China enter into a treaty of friendship and alliance. The United States will recognize the government in Taiwan. So when we talk about Korea, we can't talk about Korea without understanding it in the context of China and remembering also this idea of containment. Well, we failed a little bit at containment because China is communist now. So what do we do then when Korea threatens to go entirely communist? And are we concerned about its proximity to the USSR and Korea's proximity to China, Korea's proximity to Japan? So the big question of why do we care about these small countries and what government they have, whether they're communist or not? The answer is always containment and this fear of the dominoes falling. You contain communism where it is, and if it starts to spread, you go in and you show this military force and you stop it. And that's what we're doing in China. So Korea, after World War II, is going to be divided at the 38th parallel. And in the north is the Soviet sphere, and in the south it is an American or a democratic sphere. When the North invades the South, Truman will act in concert with the United Nations, and they will fight all the way back to almost to China, actually. And MacArthur wants to invade China and actually participates in some border skirmishes. And Truman says, stop. MacArthur doesn't listen. MacArthur has to be fired by Truman for insubordination, and he will be brought home. There's this conversation that happens around Korea of limited war, and of course Korea is not a full-scale war because we never formally declared war, but limited war versus there is no substitute for victory, which is what MacArthur said. We go in, we take care of this problem now, and we take China, right? Do we take all of Korea, or are we happy with just allowing the status quo to remain at the 38th parallel? So I'm going to move this forward. You can watch this progression here of the U.S. advancement of troops. So you see North Korea has come all the way down by 1950, and the United States is going to fight back. And at one point we do fight past the 38th parallel. But in the end, where we end up by the time we get to 1953, it's back at this 38th parallel. It's going. I'm going to let it go all the way up to the top before I move forward. The Korean War is the conflict in Korea is technically not over. So this is an image of the DMZ, this demilitarized zone that exists between North and South Korea. Of course, we know North Korea today is communist. South Korea is not and is doing economically well. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to be talking about Cold War culture in America, McCarthyism, and this second Red Scare.